Holy blood loss, Batman! This new Faith Great Spear has an incredible Ash of War that shoots golden waves of holy damage goodness at enemies. It also does blood loss buildup. Let's cover this amazing weapon, some great new Faith Incantation, and where it's all found. Let's go! So the Barbed Staff Spear is what we're talking about today. Now this is a great spear that does physical and holy damage, though for the most part here, you're really just focusing on the fact that it does holy damage. Now what's really unique about this is one, it is a holy weapon. It also has blood loss buildup, which is really unique for holy weapons, and it has a unique Ash of War that, funnily enough, also does blood loss buildup. So the weapon skill itself, Jori's Inquisition, is essentially like you shoot the staff in the air and do like these like golden waves similar to a couple of incantations, and they just like shoot out of the weapon. If you hold the button down, it does extend that barrage for a solid amount of time. Each one of those waves can hit enemies individually, so the more waves you hit an enemy with, the more damage it does, which leads to the larger that enemy is, right? The more damage it will do because the hitboxes are bigger, and each one of these little waves will actually continue that blood loss buildup. Like you can actually get the hemorrhage pop on enemies just from using this Ash of War. I'm kind of curious if the blood loss on this Ash of War is intentional or not. Like obviously with the weapon it's intentional, but very rare for say a holy Ash of War like this to also deal blood loss buildup, especially a ranged attack like this. It may not be a bug, it may be intentional. I just wanted to call that out in case it does get removed in the future. But either way, even if it does get removed, this weapon is still very, very strong. How you get the Barbed Staff Spear is a little bit of a journey. It comes from Jori the Elder Inquisitor in the Abyssal Woods, technically, but you do need to go through the Darklight Catacombs in order to reach him, which is a pretty long trek to get to. But here's how you get there. Start at the Shadow Keep main plaza side of Graith and follow the path to the ladder that leads you down to like the water level, and then there's like another room with a ladder in it that you can follow down where there is actually a painting and an illusionary wall here that you'll need to destroy to continue onwards. There will be a stone coffin in this room that you can then ride down to the castle watering hole, and then from here you'll need to head south until you reach the Recluses River downstream. Once you're at this location, look for the graves on the cliff and climb your way down. Just don't fall off like I did the first time. Then head to the next cliff face and do the same thing. Hug the wall once you do reach the bottom, and you'll eventually reach the Darklight Catacombs. You'll need to work your way through this entire catacombs when there's some good loot in here, by the way, as well. Once you get to the very end, you'll then be able to fight Jori the Elder Inquisitor and receive the Barbed Staff Spear after you defeat him. For your equipment for this build, we're obviously using this great spear. I'm using the Erdtree seal, which has the highest faith scaling. Because this weapon primarily just scales with faith, we're using a seal that replicates that aspect as well. I'm also running a shield here just in case I want to do a little bit of poke, because it is a piercing weapon, so you can keep the shield up while still poking with the weapon. Any armor here also will do. I am wearing the Crucible Knight set as I think it fits the aesthetic of the weapon. For your talismans, the Dragon Crest Great Shield talisman, the Shard of Alexander is perfect for this because of the extra damage on the Ash of War. I'm also using the Holy Scorpion Charm here for the extra damage of the holy damage, as this weapon mostly does holy damage. The Lord of Blood's Exaltation, I'm in two minds about, because like obviously, right, we're doing blood loss build up and you do get that effect pretty often, so you get that additional like blood loss pop, which increases your attack power. However, because for the most part you are standing a little bit away from enemies, I've noticed a couple of times when the blood loss trigger actually happens that the Lord of Blood's Exaltation doesn't actually trigger itself to increase my attack power, because I'm like too far away when the hemorrhage effect goes off. So it's just something to think about. Like definitely use it, and if you are using it, make sure you stand close enough to the enemies to get it to pop, but it is something I actually have noticed. As an alternative, you could run the Crusade Insignia to buff your attack power after defeating enemies. The Carrion Filigreed Crest is obviously great here as well to reduce the cost of the FP. Flock's Canvas Talisman, if you want to lean a little bit more into the incantations that we're about to get into, or say like the Two-Handed Sword Talisman isn't a bad option either. Like it doesn't affect the Ash of War's damage, but just like your basic two-handed attacks that you're going to use if you're two-handing this weapon, right, you will get the benefits from that. And plus, like, it does do solid amount of damage and the blood loss and stuff just from the weapon itself. So there's a bit of like options there, but I would stick with the Lord of Blood's Exaltation or something, maybe a bit more damage negation for the DLC, as long as you are getting that trigger effect actually occurring. Also, if you like what we do here, consider hitting that like button or subscribing, or the membership program. For just $1, you can get early access to videos like this and all of my other guides, build videos, and those cheeky long form essays we do. Plus, there are other benefits like members only channels in the Discord, merch, and more. So if you like what we do here, please consider hitting that join button or subscribing, as it helps me more than you know. But enough of that, back to the video. Because of all this faith, we are going to use some incantations. Now, Flame Grant Me Strength and Golden Vow are obviously fantastic in any faith build, and that is the same for this one as well. I'm using a few of the newer incantations here that fit the aesthetic of, say, the weapon, like the Golden Arcs and Giant Golden Arc. Golden Arc comes from Morth Ruins. In the section of Morth Ruins where you can actually drop down a hole, there is a chest in there that contains the Golden Arcs. This incantation is pretty solid. You can charge it up. It does deal a decent amount of damage. I do lean towards the Giant Golden Arc if I am going to use one of these two. I just feel like the damage number is a little bit more consistent with that, as sometimes these arcs can miss or they don't hit properly. Like, they're a little bit finicky sometimes with their hitboxes just because of the way the arc actually like shoots out from you. The Giant Golden Arc, however, is actually found in a chest in the ruins of Unte, which, if you remember where we were before at the castle watering hole, you'll need to go back there. There is a furnace golem that is blocking the doorway here that you'll need to reactivate with the hefty furnace pot. Once you've done that in the church there in that chest, you'll find the Giant Golden Arc, which is the one that I prefer here. You can also charge this up. It is a massive arc wave that does shoot out from you. It does slightly more damage. It's a really good AoE option, though even just the Ash of War on this weapon is also really good as an AoE option, but it gives you some alternative ways to deal damage. And then I am also using the Knight's Lightning Spear here because it is just an insane amount of damage just on its own without even buffing it in any other way. It's also lightning damage, which gives you a bit more variation for this build, which we'll touch on in a little bit about some of the resistances that a lot of the enemies have for Holy, but having an option to deal a different type of damage in this way is definitely valuable to have, and just the damage numbers on Knight's Lightning Spear is pretty gnarly anyway, so you definitely want to use that anyway. Now, this comes from the Scorpion River Catacombs. Now, in the massive room that has all of the spike traps that like fall down, where the Deathblight Eyes dude is, it's actually behind him. Now, you can get there either via climbing on top of the spike drop traps or via a ledge, which is like to the wall side near where he is located. You just essentially need to go behind there, and then you'll be able to find the incantation there. Attribute wise, I'm running 50 vigor, 35 mind, 40 endurance. Now, you don't really need strength or dexterity here for this build. Like, even though the weapon does say it scales with strength and dex D, it really barely does at all. It's almost exclusively faith scaling, so I pumped any spare point I have into faith to get that as much scaling as possible because of all the holy damage this weapon does as well. And some tips for this build. Buffs wise, we're using Radahn's Great Rune for that FP, HP, and stamina buff there. Flame Grant Me Strength, the Golden Vow incantations, and the Holy Shrouding cracked tier in my flask as well to buff holy tax even further. Because this is mostly a faith only build as well, like, and the spear does basically scale with only faith, right, as we talked about, you can use any faith spell you want. You've got access to like literally all of them, so feel free to like use any of the other incantations that I haven't mentioned here that you've come across that you personally like. Could be one of the new ones, could be some of the old ones. It's entirely up to you. Just wanted to focus on the newer incantations to fit with this like build aesthetic, but mainly focusing on the Great Spear here, which is like the highlight of this build. And the only other real downside of this weapon in general, but especially the Ash of War, is because it exclusively does holy damage, and almost all of the like base game end game bosses are resistant to holy damage. It's a little disappointing. You could try and remove that resistance with something like the new Sword of Light or Sword of Darkness. I did touch on where you can get them in my recent weapons video, which I'll link here if you want to know that. But now the Ash of War on them does actually remove or lower the holy damage negation on targets. So you could essentially like use the Ash of War on that to remove that holy damage negation, and then switch back to this weapon to lean into that if you wanted to as an alternative. Or you could switch this up to say something like a lightning build, or even using something like the Blasphemous Blade with a little bit more strength. You'd be able to wield that with this build as well, right, as a, you know, a strength and faith weapon there. So you've got options there. It's just something to call out that if you enjoy this weapon and you absolutely destroy enemies with it in the DLC, once you hit those like other endgame bosses, it's prone to look a little depressing when you see all of that holy damage resistance that they have. But it's still a really good weapon. It's just you've got to think of different ways to mitigate that, either via incantations or using a different weapon for those specific encounters, which you should be doing anyway, right? right? Like, never be afraid to switch up your builds to maximize your effects on certain bosses. It's definitely how you succeed in Elden Ring. Let me know your thoughts on this build in the comments down below. What would you change? What would you add? Any other weapons that you like in this build setup? But thank you guys for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is NorZZa, and I hope you have a great day.